In the town of Delphos, Ohio, during the last week of February 2026, a city employee entered an old house to inspect it prior to demolition. The house had been vacant for 11 years. The interior had long since been cleared out. No furniture, no curtains, no personal belongings. But on the ground floor, leaning against the south wall, stood an unframed oil painting. It wasn't attached to anything. It was simply there. In front of the painting, on the floor, lay a yellowed envelope. There was a single line written on the envelope: "Deliver this painting to its rightful owner." There was no signature, no date, nothing official. The employee did not open the envelope. He did not move the painting. He took a photo and called his supervisor. The file reached the Whitmore Legacy Bureau 3 days later. Arthur Whitmore read the file twice. On the first reading, he paused and looked at the referral letter from the Allen County Probate Court. The court had deemed it appropriate to consult the Bureau before initiating the process for unclaimed property. This was not a standard procedure. The presence of the envelope was unusual. It did not constitute an official will and carried no legal obligation. Nothing came out of the envelope. Only that single line was written on the outside. The court official had recorded it as an ambiguous statement of intent and handwritten a note on the file cover: "The owner may need to be identified." So the court didn't have an answer either. On his second reading, Arthur focused on the property's title history. The property, 204 Maple Street, Delphos, Ohio. Built in 1947. Last registered owner, Ruth Eleanor Marsh. Ruth Marsh had passed away on September 14, 2015, at Allen County Memorial. There were no family members listed in the records. There was no emergency contact. The funeral arrangements had been handled by the city. For the next 11 years, the house had stood exactly as it was. Because no one had come. No one had called. No one had claimed it. No one had inquired about it. The court had initiated the abandonment proceedings 2 years ago. The demolition order had become final last month. Then Arthur looked at the photograph of the painting. It was a small photo taken with a city official's phone. The painting was approximately 64 centimeters. It was unframed. The colors had faded, but the technique was sound. The figure, the light, and the background were in harmony. A portrait of a middle-aged woman. The woman wasn't looking at the camera. She was turned to the left, as if listening to someone speak. The second photo showed the back of the painting. The canvas had yellowed, and a small piece of paper was taped to it. On the paper was a handwritten address: 1140 Crescent Lane. Below it was a year, 1958. Arthur placed the photo on the desk. There was no other information about the painting in the court file. No appraisal had been done, no expert opinion had been sought, and the painting was still at home. So the questions didn't stem from the painting itself, but from that single line of writing: "Return it to its rightful owner." Arthur stood up and called for Clara. Clara came over, took the file, and looked at the photo. Was the painting left at the house, or was it placed there later? We don't know. The neighbors haven't been interviewed. The house has been empty for 11 years. So either someone left it there while Ruth was still alive, or Ruth put it there herself and didn't tell anyone. Clara paused. Was the note in the envelope handwritten? Yes. Is the handwriting that of an older person or a younger one? Arthur hadn't thought of that. The photo isn't clear. We need to look at the original. Then we need to go to Delphos first. Arthur took the file without saying a word and returned to his desk. Clara stood at the door, looking at Arthur, and said, "Why was this painting left there?" she asked. If someone wanted to return it to its rightful owner, why did they leave it with the only person who knew about that house? Why didn't they write a name on the envelope? Maybe writing the name was dangerous, Arthur said. After saying it, he paused for a moment, as if he hadn't expected the sentence to come out. Or maybe they knew who the real owner was, but that person could no longer be found. Evelyn Carter had opened Allen County's property records that morning. 1140 Crescent Lane. Registered owner in 1958, Harriet Agnes Devereux, Hattie Devereux. In 1966, the property had been sold to Raymond K. Morse. The deed looked normal. Since then, the address had changed hands 3 more times. Today, a small commercial building stood on the site, a narrow lot squeezed between 2 stores. Evelyn jotted down the name Hattie Devereux and moved on to Ruth Marsh's birth record. Ruth Eleanor Marsh. June 3, 1931. Van Wert County, Ohio. Mother's name, Eleanor Grace Marsh. Maiden name Devereux. Devereux. The same last name. Evelyn flipped back to the pages she had been reading. Hattie Devereux shared the same last name as Ruth's mother. This was no coincidence. She could have been her aunt. The records didn't show that yet. But the likelihood of a connection was high. Ruth Marsh's family had lived at a certain address in Delphos, and that address belonged to Hattie Devereux in 1958. Evelyn opened the Van Wert County Notary records. 1966. Hattie Agnes Devereux had filed a name change petition with the court in August 1966. Her new name, Harriet Agnes Wells. The petition had been approved. It was a standard form, signature, approval stamp, date of filing. But at the very bottom of the form, outside the official section, a short sentence had been handwritten in the notes line. The clerk who filed it hadn't marked it and had left it off the record. Most likely, they hadn't noticed it. Evelyn read that sentence 3 times. She set her pen down on the desk. Marcus glanced at the file before leaving the office that afternoon. "Does this painting have any monetary value?" he asked. "We don't know yet," said Clara. "It's unsigned. It could be worthless, or it could be very valuable. Then let's look into it and see." Marcus looked at the photograph. He examined the woman's pose, the condition of the painting's edges, and the faded colors in the background. "Someone left this at home to hide it," he said. "In a safe place. An empty place. A place that wouldn't be opened for a long time. Or abandoned it," said Clara. "Someone who abandons something doesn't leave an envelope." Marcus placed the photograph on the table. Someone who leaves an envelope wants something to be known. But who did they leave it for? No one knows. No one said anything. Marcus continued. "If Ruth Marsh took this painting, why didn't she tell anyone? Why didn't she leave a will?" "Maybe there was no one to leave it to," said Clara. "Or maybe she couldn't find the person she wanted to leave it to." Marcus closed the file. "I don't know what you'll find in Delphos, but the painting's story begins long before Ruth Marsh." The next morning, Clara and Marcus went to Delphos. It was a 4-hour drive from Chicago. They were crossing the Indiana border. Winter hadn't yet receded. The fields were grayish, the sky was low, and patches of frozen earth lay along the roadside. It was just past noon when they entered the town. Delphos was small. A few main streets, an old bank building on the corner, a restaurant sign with faded letters. There was no traffic. Aside from a pedestrian or two, no one was visible on the street. 204 Maple Street was on a side street. It was a single-story, red brick house with a gravel front yard. The city's demolition notice was taped to the door, fluttering slightly in the wind. Clara pushed the door open and stepped inside. Places that have stood empty for a long time carry a certain smell: dry wood, stuffy air, accumulated silence. This house smelled that way too. The wooden floorboards on the ground floor were cracked. The walls were faded. A shelf nail was still in the kitchen, but there was nothing on it. Clara went to the south wall. The spot where the painting had been left was still visible. There was a rectangular mark on the unpainted wood, the spot where the painting had leaned for years. Right in front of it, in the dust on the floor, was a small rectangular space, the spot where the envelope had been. Marcus looked at the wall. The painting was leaning against the wall here. It wasn't hung on the nail. Yes, so someone put it here and left. If they'd hung it on the nail, it would have been permanent. They leaned it against the wall, treated it like a temporary spot. Clara bent down and looked at the dust. Marcus walked around the room. He looked in the kitchen, then in the bathroom. It wasn't clear what he was looking for. He was trying to catch a glimpse of something he'd missed. There was no forced door, no broken window. The house stood just as its last owner had left it. Do you think Ruth Marsh had any visitors in her final years? There was no one listed on her death certificate. So no. Marcus headed toward the door. We need to check with the neighbors. But let's go to Crescent Lane first. 1140 Crescent Lane was a 20-minute walk from Maple Street. A small commercial building stood there. Its iron gate was closed, and the windows were frosted glass. The building was squeezed between 2 stores, a barber shop on the left, an empty storefront on the right. A small sign at the entrance read, Delphos History and Culture Association. Inside, a man in his 70s was folding his newspaper at a single table. As Marcus pushed the door open, the man looked up and adjusted his glasses. "Come in. Can I help you?" "We're researching the history of Delphos. Specifically, a family that lived at this address between 1958 and 1966. The last name was Devereux." The old man adjusted his glasses and looked at Marcus and Clara. "Hattie," Marcus asked, "do you know her?" I didn't know her. I was too young, but my mother did. Hattie Devereux was known back then as a quiet resident of this street. She didn't get involved with anyone much. Then one day, my mother always said, they woke up one morning and everything was gone. The house went up for sale and Hattie was nowhere to be found. Do you know anything about why she left? No, my mom didn't know either. She'd just say, something bad happened, so she chose to leave. Things like that used to happen around here. Someone would leave, and no one would ask questions or go looking for them. Clara took out her notebook. Were there any other names in the Devereux family? Any other family members? I don't know, but I can look it up if you'd like. You should, Clara said. The man gave her his phone number. When they stepped outside, before Marcus started walking, something bad happened, and she chose to leave, he said. Yes, in 1966. By 1966, Hattie Devereux had changed her name, sold her house, and left town. And she had written that single sentence about the painting in the margin of the notary's document, as if she didn't want to give it official status, but simply to put it on record. She wanted to leave a quiet trace. More information was needed, so attempts were made to contact neighbors in the area. 2 doors went unanswered. At the 3rd door, a woman opened it, in her 70s, with white hair and glasses. Her name was Norma Jeffries, and she had lived on this street for 14 years. She knew Ruth Marsh. She was a very quiet woman, said Norma. She had greeted Clara at the door but hadn't let her in. They were talking at the door, and Norma was holding onto the doorframe with one hand. She'd say, "Hello, I'm fine," and walk right by. Over the years, no one ever came to visit her. She never went to see anyone either. Did you ever have long conversations? Sometimes in the winter. We'd have tea a couple of times while shoveling snow. Sometimes we'd talk about everyday things. Sometimes she'd talk about the old town, how it had changed, which buildings had been torn down. But she never talked about herself. There was a painting in the house, said Clara. An oil painting, unframed. Did you see it? Norma adjusted her glasses. I saw it once. It was a hot summer day, and Ruth had opened the window. I was walking through the garden and caught a glimpse inside. Ruth was sitting in her chair right in front of that painting. She was just staring at it. I watched for a long time because it struck me as odd. The way she was looking at the painting was strange. What do you mean? Norma thought for a moment. She wasn't looking at it the way people look at old paintings. She was looking at it as if she were remembering something, or as if she were waiting for something. Who was in the painting? A middle-aged woman. She had a strong presence. She reminded me of Ruth, but she was younger. I mean, not like a younger version of Ruth, but there was a family resemblance. Her build, her posture. I thought about that later. But at the time, I didn't pay much attention to it. Did you ask Ruth about it? I did. I asked, who is this? Norma remembered the exact words, but she was also weighing something. No one knows her name anymore, she said. She didn't say anything else. I didn't want to press her. Ruth already looked very tired back then. She didn't live much longer after that. When Clara stepped outside, Marcus was waiting by the car. What did she say? She says the woman in the painting looks like Ruth, like a family resemblance. Ruth, on the other hand, said, nobody knows her name anymore. Someone erased her, or let her be erased, or she erased herself. That evening, Clara called the office. Evelyn answered the phone. Did you find Hattie Devereux? Clara asked. I did. Ruth Marsh's mother's maiden name was Devereux. Hattie Devereux is a close relative of Ruth's mother, most likely her aunt. She bought 1140 Crescent Lane in 1958, sold it in 1966, and moved to Van Wert County. Why did she move? There's nothing in the records. But she went to court right before she moved. For what? Evelyn paused for a moment. A name change. Hattie Devereux changed her name to Harriet Wells in 1966. She's selling the house, leaving town, changing her name. It all happened in the same year. Yes, but I should also mention this. On the name change document, outside the official section, there's a small handwritten sentence in the notes section. The person who filed it didn't mark it. What does it say? The painting goes to REM. Clara said nothing. REM stands for Ruth Eleanor Marsh. Before Hattie Devereux changed her name and left town, she had written a single sentence in the margin of a notary document. She was leaving the painting to Ruth. But why was it in the margin of a notary document? Why wasn't it a will? Why wasn't it a separate deed of transfer? Why just a margin note? Why that tiny line that even the archivist hadn't noticed? Evelyn, said Clara. Did the painting belong to Hattie? Or was Hattie just the one who had it? Evelyn was silent for a moment. I don't know, she said. But the painting had been at Crescent Lane since 1958. Hattie moved there in 1958, and she left it behind when she moved away in 1966. So the painting came with her. But the 1958 date and address on the back of the painting don't show where the painting came from before that house. They just say it was at that address at that time. The painting depicted a woman. No one knew her name anymore. According to Norma, the woman in the painting resembled Ruth. Hattie Devereux had left it with Ruth. But why was it written on the notary document? Why secretly? Why in a hard-to-read corner? And the envelope requesting that it be returned to its rightful owner. Who had written that envelope? Was it Ruth or was it Hattie? At 8 in the morning, Evelyn found the record of Harriet Agnes Wells's death in Van Wert County. Harriet Wells, the new name Hattie Devereux had taken, had passed away in 1998 at the age of 74 in a nursing home in Van Wert. The record listed one family member at the time of her death, a son, Thomas Raymond Wells. His address at that time was listed as Van Wert County, Ohio. Evelyn called Thomas Wells. The census records had tracked him. He appeared to have moved to Columbus, Ohio, in 2019. His phone number was active. Evelyn walked into Arthur's room. Hattie Devereux has a son, she said. Thomas Wells. He's 62 years old. He lives in Columbus. Arthur was writing something on the piece of paper in his hand. What does he say about the painting? I haven't called him yet. Call him, but first tell him this. The sentence in Hattie's notarial deed. The painting goes to REM. Does that count as a formal transfer? No. It was recorded as a marginal note. It's not signed, nor is it notarized. Its legal validity is debatable. So if Thomas Wells tries to claim his mother's estate, he could argue that the painting belongs to him. Yes. Arthur put down his pen. Then you need to call Thomas Wells. But don't mention the painting's existence directly. Find out what he knows first. Evelyn called Thomas Wells before noon. The phone was answered on the third ring. A middle-aged, weary male voice. Wells. Mr. Wells, this is Evelyn Carter. I'm calling from the Whitmore Legacy Bureau in Chicago. We're conducting an inheritance investigation regarding your mother, Harriet Wells. Do you have a few minutes? There was a brief silence. My mother passed away in 1998. I know. The investigation concerns the time before that, before 1966. Do you know the name Hattie Devereux? This time, the silence lasted longer. Is this something to do with my mother's sister? Evelyn hesitated for a moment. Mr. Wells, did your mother have a sister? She did, but it was one of those topics we didn't talk about in our family. My mother never brought it up. Do you know why she didn't? I don't know. I asked once when I was little. I said, don't you have an aunt? My mother said, I did, but she's gone now. So as I grew up, I stopped asking. Some things just happen that way in a family. What was that sister's name? Frances, said Thomas. Frances Devereux. Evelyn thanked Wells for the information. She called Arthur and relayed what Wells had said. Then Arthur called Clara. Clara was still in Delphos. As they spoke on the phone, Clara was sitting in the hotel lobby. It was cold outside. The main street was visible through the window. Frances Devereux, said Arthur. So she's Hattie's sister. We don't know yet. But Hattie changed her name in 1966, sold the house, and left. I asked if your mother had a sister. What happened to Frances in 1966? Arthur paused. What did Thomas say? He said, it was one of those things people don't talk about. He doesn't want to say more. Does he not want to say more? Or does he not know? It could be either. Why did Hattie leave in 1966? The man at the Delphos Historical Society had said, something bad happened. Thomas Wells had said, it was one of those things people don't talk about. Two different people, two different places, two different generations, but the same silence. Marcus, Clara said. Delphos, 1966. What would we find if we looked through the local newspaper archives? The Delphos Herald was stored on microfilm in the basement of the Allen County Library. The librarian took them down to the basement and pulled up the January, December 1966 archives. Marcus scanned through the newspaper archives. Clara took the necessary notes. A small news item from May 1966. Page 7, 2 columns. Local woman admitted to Vandalia State Hospital. There was no name at the bottom of the article, but it was mentioned within the text. F. Devereux, 38, a resident of Maple Street. Maple Street. Ruth Marsh's house was also on Maple Street. Clara read the article. The article was short, 3 paragraphs. Frances Devereux had been investigated by Allen County authorities following complaints from her neighbors and had been committed to Vandalia State Hospital on grounds of mental instability. Her family's consent had been obtained. Signed, Harriet A. Devereux, sister. Marcus read the article from the beginning. Then he read it again. Hattie signed it, he said. Yes. She personally signed the document, sending her sister to the institution. Yes. No one could say a word. The library grew even quieter. Clara thought back to 1966. At that time, certain psychiatric diagnoses could be interpreted quite broadly. Single mothers, women resisting social pressures, those with children born out of wedlock, or people viewed as problematic by their families could easily be stigmatized. Frances had given birth to a child out of wedlock in 1957 and lost the child shortly afterward. A newspaper article published 9 years later stated that she had experienced mental health issues. But what truly shook Clara was another detail. The person who approved this decision was Frances's own sister. As far as we're concerned, there's something bad written in that document, said Marcus. But Hattie must have been under pressure to sign it in 1966. Or desperate. Or both. And by the end of that year, Clara said slowly, she changed her name and left. Clara called Arthur on the phone. Then she told him what had happened. Arthur didn't say a word on the other end of the line. He waited for Clara to finish speaking. How long was Frances at Vandalia? Arthur asked. We don't know. Vandalia State Hospital closed in 1980. The records were distributed. Where were they distributed? To the Ohio Health Archives. In Columbus. Tell Evelyn. Arthur, Clara paused. Do you realize what Hattie did? She handed her sister over to an institution. She signed the documents herself. Then, out of shame or something else, she changed her name and ran away. Yes. And she left the painting with Ruth. Yes. Why Ruth? Arthur was silent for a moment. Because Ruth was not involved in this, he said. She wasn't to blame. And she knew Frances. Clara thought about that. Ruth Marsh knew Frances Devereux. When Hattie left, she had left the painting, Frances's painting, with Ruth. Ruth had kept it for decades. And before she passed away, she had written this on the envelope, deliver to the rightful owner. The painting's rightful owner isn't Frances, Clara said. Frances probably stayed in Vandalia, or passed away there. Yes. So the real owner. It could be Frances's child, said Arthur. If she has one. Before hanging up, Clara said one more thing. Arthur, why didn't Ruth give this painting away? She didn't sell it or throw it away. She kept it with her until she passed away. But she didn't leave a will either. Because she couldn't find the heir, said Arthur. Or she tried to find them, but couldn't. We're trying to do what she couldn't. Evelyn called the Ohio Health Archives that afternoon. The records from Vandalia State Hospital had been transferred to the Central Archive in Columbus in 1980. They weren't open to the public, but legal heirs or researchers could request access by submitting a written application. There was a 2 to 4 week waiting period. Evelyn submitted the request. Then she began searching for Frances Devereux in other sources. First, she checked Ohio death records. Frances Agnes Devereux. She was born in 1928. If she were still alive, she would be 98 now. She searched the Ohio death records from 1966 to 1990. There was no record under the name Frances Devereux. After the date Harriet Wells had recorded, that is, after 1966, it was as if Frances had been erased from the records. Sometimes this meant a name change at the agency. Other times, it meant the records were incomplete. Allen County birth records. 1945 to 1966. Was there a birth record under the name Frances Devereux? Evelyn searched. Frances Agnes Devereux. A baby girl. Date of birth, November 3, 1957. Delphos, Allen County, Ohio. Father, not listed. Evelyn paused. The baby girl's name, Nora Frances Devereux. But a small note had been added at the bottom of the record. Handwritten, not official. Date, February 1958. The child was placed with the Cassidy family. Born in 1957. Placed with a family in 1958. And in 1958, the same year, that address had been written on the back of the painting, 1140 Crescent Lane. Hattie had bought that house in 1958. Evelyn looked at the screen. The pieces were coming together, but they didn't quite fit yet. Frances gave birth to her child in 1957. In 1958, the child was placed with the Cassidy family. The painting was created that same year, with Hattie's address written on the back. In 1966, Frances was sent to an institution. Hattie changed her name and left. The painting had been left to Ruth. And Nora Frances Devereux, that little girl, must be 68 years old now, living somewhere. If she's still alive. Evelyn turned to Arthur. Frances has a child, she said, born in 1957. Nora. But she was placed with a family in 1958. The last name is Cassidy. Arthur paused at his desk and, are you saying she was adopted? The document says was placed. I haven't seen an official adoption record yet. If the adoption wasn't finalized, Arthur said slowly, the biological line of inheritance remains open. Yes, we need to find Nora Cassidy. Arthur was about to say something else. But consider this, Arthur said. The painting belongs to Frances. Frances may have painted it herself, or it may have been painted for her. In either case, the painting was a trace of a mother. Nora, who was given to the Cassidy family, may never have known of the painting's existence. Evelyn didn't say a word. And Ruth Marsh, Arthur said, held on to that painting all this time. Return it to its rightful owner, she said. Ruth might have been looking for Nora, or she was hoping someone would come looking for her. That same evening, Thomas Wells called the office back. Evelyn answered the phone. We spoke before, Thomas said. About my mother. Yes, Mr. Wells. I heard my mother had a painting. His voice was calm, but there seemed to be something hidden beneath his words. A friend told me. Someone in Delphos. Evelyn paused. Delphos. The man from the Historical Society. Mr. Wells, who called you? It doesn't matter who called. I want to know whether the painting is part of my mother's estate or not. Our investigation is still ongoing. How long will this investigation take? A few more days. I'm a claimant, too. His voice was harsher now. My mother is Harriet Wells. Her estate passes to me. Evelyn picked up the pen but didn't write anything. Mr. Wells, we cannot consider any claims until our investigation is complete. That's standard procedure. So it's standard procedure. Look, my mother kept that painting for years. That painting is her property. Or maybe it's in her care. Who knows? Said Evelyn. There was a moment of silence. What do you mean? Mr. Wells, I can't say much until our investigation is finished. But I'll promise you this. You'll be the first to know when it's complete. Thomas Wells hung up the phone. Evelyn looked at her desk. Thomas Wells had learned of the painting's existence. That meant someone had spoken up. Was it the man from the Historical Society? Norma Jeffries? Or someone else? She called Marcus. Someone in Delphos called Thomas Wells, she said. They mentioned the painting. Marcus was silent for a moment. I spoke with him before I called you. Check on the man from the Historical Society. I will. But you should know this. Thomas Wells has laid claim to it. Marcus paused before hanging up. Have you found Nora Cassidy? Not yet. Then don't let anyone close this case until you find her. Late that night, Evelyn searched the Ohio birth records for the last name Cassidy. Nora Frances Devereux had been adopted into the Cassidy family in 1958. It appeared there was no official adoption certificate. Either it hadn't been finalized or it had been registered under a different last name. Evelyn searched Ohio for women with the last name Cassidy born between 1957 and 1960. It took a while. A record turned up in the Columbus database she was searching. Nora Jean Cassidy, born 1957. Her birth was registered in Ohio in 1959, 2 years late, but it had been done. Current address, Findlay, Ohio, Hancock County. Evelyn paused, then looked at the photo on the painting. She looked at the woman in the painting. Ruth Marsh had kept this painting for decades. She wrote, "Delivered to the rightful owner," on the envelope. Frances Devereux had either commissioned this painting or painted it herself. They didn't know that yet. But the painting belonged to her. And Frances's child was currently living in Findlay, Ohio. She was 68 years old. She might never have known her mother. She had no idea that her mother had painted this portrait or even that it existed. Evelyn closed her notebook and remained seated. There was one more thing she knew, but she hadn't shared it with anyone yet. She looked at the photo of the back of the painting again. The city official had taken the photo at a bad angle. The image was blurry. But in the lower left corner of the canvas, there was another small piece of paper firmly stuck to the yellowed fabric. It wasn't next to the address label. It was somewhere else. and 2 letters were visible on it. FD, Frances Devereux. The painting was unsigned on the front, but on the back, in a nearly invisible corner, Frances had left the initials of her own name. Evelyn called Clara. "The painting isn't unsigned," she said. "What do you mean? What are you talking about?" "It's unsigned on the front, but on the back, in the left corner, there are 2 letters. FD Frances Devereux." Evelyn leaned over her desk. Frances painted the picture herself. She painted herself with her own hands, and she placed her initials in such a spot that only someone looking for them would find them. Clara didn't say anything. This painting isn't just a portrait of Frances. It's the only trace she left behind. Before hanging up, Clara asked, "Does Nora know about this?" "No," said Evelyn. "Nora probably doesn't even know who her mother was." The call ended. Evelyn stood at her desk for a while longer. She looked at the photograph on the desk. For 68 years, no one had searched for this painting, but the case was nearing a conclusion. She would continue the next day. That morning, Arthur picked up the phone. Clara was speaking from inside the car. Marcus was driving. They were on their way to Finley. "The Thomas Wells matter," Clara said. "What are we going to do?" Arthur had opened the file on his desk. He had read that marginal note on Hattie Devereux's notarial document once again that morning. Hattie had no authority to transfer the painting, he said. The painting belonged to Frances. Frances was sent to Vandalia in 1966. Her legal capacity became questionable. But that doesn't mean the painting passed to Hattie. Hattie kept the painting, then entrusted it to Ruth. That was a trust, not a transfer of ownership. So what can Thomas do? Legally, very little. He could claim that his mother held a trust and that the trust has value, but it would be hard to prove. The primary line of inheritance comes from Frances, and Frances's biological heir is Nora. Will Thomas accept that? Arthur paused for a moment. He'll find out when we tell him. But know this, Thomas was part of this story, too, without knowing it. He grew up with a secret his mother carried. We need to break the news to him gently. Finley was 3 hours southwest of Delphos, Hancock County. It was a small but lively town, larger and more orderly than Delphos. Clara and Marcus arrived in town in the afternoon. Nora Jean Cassidy's address was on Maple Grove Drive, a single-story, cream-painted house with 2 small willow trees in front. Marcus parked the car. There were 2 willow trees in front of the house, with slender branches, not yet green. They both waited in silence. "This isn't getting any easier," Marcus said. "No, but we can't stop now." Clara reached for the doorknob. She paused. "Nora doesn't know her biological mother," she said. "The Cassidys probably never told her anything. Or maybe they did, but no one knows now." "Yes. She's 68. How are we going to tell her this?" Marcus looked at the house through the window. "We can't leave without telling her," he said. "I know, but how do I start?" "Start at the beginning. With Delphos. With the painting. You don't have to say everything at once." Nora opened the door herself. She was 68 years old, a careful woman with white and gray hair. She was wearing house clothes. She opened the door halfway and looked out. "Yes." "Nora Cassidy?" said Clara. "I'm Clara Whitmore. I'm from the Whitmore Legacy Bureau in Chicago. Could we have a quick chat?" Nora narrowed her eyes. "The Legacy Bureau?" "Yes. We're handling a case that concerns you. I'm not expecting to inherit anything." "We know," said Clara. "But maybe you should have been." Nora hesitated for a moment, then pulled the door open wider. "Please come in." It was warm inside the house. A small stove was burning. There were bookshelves on the walls, filled with old books. An old piano in the corner. It looked like a teacher's home. Nora sat them down on the couch and took a seat across from them. "What case is this?" she asked. Clara didn't open the file. She didn't take out any documents. "A few months ago, a woman died in Delphos, Ohio," she said. "Her name was Ruth Marsh. She'd left something for you to keep at your house, but she couldn't find you. We found you on her behalf." Nora fell silent. "Ruth Marsh," she said. "I don't know that name." "It's normal that you don't. Ruth didn't know you, but she was looking for you." "Why was she looking for me?" Clara moved forward slowly. "Ruth had been hiding something she believed belonged to you. For decades. Something about your mother. I suppose she meant the Cassidy family," Nora said in a flat tone. "Are there any inheritances from the Cassidy family?" "No," said Clara. "It's about your biological mother." Nora didn't move, but her breathing changed. "I don't know who my biological mother is." "We do," said Clara. "Her name was Frances Devereux." She was born in Delphos, Ohio, in 1928. In 1957, when she was 30, she gave birth to a baby girl. That child is you. Nora didn't say anything for a long time. Then she looked out the window. The Cassidy family never said anything either, she said. We know. They never said a word. Yes. Then the mother who raised me knew the whole truth. She probably did. When she passed away, she didn't leave anything about it. No letter or note. Nora thought for a moment. Maybe she thought I didn't want to know. Maybe she was hesitant. I don't know. A little time passed. Nora got up and went to the kitchen. Clara and Marcus waited. They heard the sound of running water, then the clink of a glass. When Nora returned, she was holding a glass of water. She didn't drink it. She set it on the table. Frances Devereux, she said. She was testing the name on her tongue. Where did she live? In Delphos. On Maple Street. Maple Street. Nora repeated it once. Did she pass away? Yes. In 1974. How old was she? 46. Nora didn't say anything. How did she pass away? Clara paused. She was sent to Vandalia State Hospital in 1966. She stayed there. She passed away there in 1974. Nora gripped the table with her hand. She was clinging to something. Why was she sent there? The official records say mental instability. But that diagnosis was used very broadly back then. It was sometimes used for unmarried women with children like you. Nora stared at the table for a moment. So was she sent here because she gave birth to me? We don't know for sure, but it's possible. Nora stood up and walked over to the window. She stood there for a while. Then she turned back. Was she never able to leave? From Vandalia? No, she wasn't. She stayed there until 1974. 8 years. Yes. Nora placed her hand on the edge of the window. So while I was growing up with the Cassidys, she was there, wasn't she? Clara didn't say anything. It was true, and it didn't need to be said. Clara took the photo of the painting out of the file. It was a clear photo, taken with professional equipment, not a municipal phone camera. The entire surface of the painting was visible. The woman was turned to the left, sitting with a strong posture. The paint had faded, but her face was clear, her bone structure, her jawline, her gaze. Clara placed the photo in front of Nora. This painting is Frances's. She painted herself with her own hands. She hid her initials on the back. Ruth Marsh kept it hidden for decades, and before she passed away, she wrote, "Return this painting to its rightful owner." Nora looked at the photo. She stared at it for a long time. Then she picked up the photo and held it close. She looked at the woman's face. Clara didn't say anything. Neither did Marcus. Nora gently placed the photograph on the table. She didn't take her hand off it. "She looks like me," she said. Clara waited. "My sister used to say that all the time. Your face doesn't look like the rest of our family." There was no one like that in the Cassidys. I'd always wondered about that. Now I know. The painting itself was brought to Finley 2 days later. Marcus picked it up from Delphos. An official receipt was obtained from the city, and a notice was filed with the Allen County Court. Arthur documented Nora's right to her biological inheritance along with Frances's Vandalia record from the Ohio Health Archives. It was confirmed that the adoption had never been finalized. Nora Jean Cassidy was the legal heir of Frances Agnes Devereux. Thomas Wells was contacted that same day. Arthur called him personally. Thomas objected at first. He spoke of his mother selling the house, keeping the painting, and that marginal note. Arthur listened to all of this. He listened without interruption, without asking questions, until the very last sentence. Then he explained it briefly and accurately. Hattie had never been the legal owner of the painting. Before Frances Devereux was admitted to the facility, she had entrusted it to Hattie. She hadn't transferred ownership. She'd simply asked her to keep it safe. Hattie had left it to Ruth. And the true heir to that trust was Nora Cassidy, Frances's biological daughter. Thomas was silent for a moment. "My mother knew this," he said finally. "Yes," said Arthur. "She did. And she never said a word." "No." A long silence followed. "Could you tell me something about Frances, too? After all, she was my aunt." "Yes, of course it's natural for you to want to know. You have a right to know this, too." The phone call had ended. There was no obstacle to handing the painting over to its rightful owner. The painting was brought to Nora's living room. Clara was there, too. Marcus carried the painting into the house and set it down. At first, Nora didn't know where to put it. The painting was bigger than she'd thought, or so it seemed. Nora turned it toward the wall to look at the back. She looked at the small piece of paper in the left corner. She touched the letters FD with her finger, but didn't mar the surface. Then she turned the painting back and leaned it against the wall next to the piano. She didn't hang it on a nail. She just leaned it there. She stepped back and looked at it. Clara looked too. She looked at Frances's face, at Nora's posture. The resemblance between the two was clearer in this light. The same shoulder line, the same head tilted slightly forward. Frances Devereux was standing there, turned to the left, with strong shoulders, as if listening to someone speak. She did this in 1958, said Nora. After you gave me to the Cassidy family in 1958, said Clara. She said it point blank. The same year. Nora didn't turn her head. So she painted herself after she gave me away. Yes. Why? Clara didn't answer. But she knew the answer, and so did Nora. When something is taken from you, you want to leave a trace. So you won't disappear. So that if someone looks for you, they'll find you. Or even if no one ever looks, at least to prove you once existed somewhere. Had Frances ever thought her daughter might one day see this painting? There was no way to know, but she had painted it, and she'd hidden her initials, in a place where only someone who was looking for them would find them. After a while, Nora turned and looked at Clara. Ruth Marsh, she said. Did she know Frances? They lived on the same street, and when Hattie left, she left the painting with Ruth. Because Ruth hadn't been involved in this. She wasn't to blame. Was Ruth looking for me? Maybe. Clara paused. Or maybe she was waiting for someone to come looking. 10 years later, 15 years later. In the end, she passed away without ever finding it herself. Nora placed her hand on the piano. What exactly did the envelope say? Deliver this painting to its rightful owner. Nora bowed her head. She was silent for a moment. Then she spoke. Ruth Marsh never saw me. No. But she said, to its rightful owner. Yes. So she knew Frances had a child, and she thought that child might be found one day. Clara didn't answer, but Nora had figured something out on her own. She wasn't asking for an answer. She was finishing the sentence. Ruth waited her whole life, too, Nora said. She waited for someone to come. Yes. No one came. We came, Clara said. Late. But we came. Nora looked first at the piano, then at the painting. Then she turned her eyes to Clara. She didn't say anything for a few seconds. Nora held the painting with both hands. It was as if she wasn't afraid it would fall, but that it might disappear once again. As Clara and Marcus were leaving, Nora was still standing in front of the painting. Clara called Arthur that evening. The painting's with Nora, she said. How did she get it? Fine. Quietly. She didn't ask too many questions. Clara paused. But I noticed something. The painting was there, standing next to the piano. Nora looked at it one last time before she left. Just for a second. Arthur didn't say anything. It's too late for Ruth, too, Clara said. Ruth couldn't find Nora. Yes. But the painting is there. Yes. Clara didn't speak for a while. My father had tried to find someone, too, she said. Margaret Holt. He couldn't find her. Yes. You knew that, too. Yes. Arthur didn't make a sound on the phone. Clara didn't continue either. They both stopped there, but this time Clara didn't close the door. She left it open. Before leaving the office, Arthur closed the file. He looked at the file cover. Delphos, Ohio. Ruth Eleanor Marsh. Unframed painting. A margin note. A single line in an envelope. These had seemed small at first, but small things sometimes carried the longest journey. He wrote 2 words inside. The same 2 words in the same place. He'd written them before in another file. Reached. Found. Evelyn was still working at her desk. Arthur, Evelyn said, the Vandalia records have arrived. Frances's. Arthur paused. Evelyn handed him the document. There's a legal proceedings section in Frances's Vandalia file. 3 separate custody and property transactions were carried out on Frances's behalf between 1966 and 1971. Evelyn placed her finger on a line. The same law firm handled all 3 of these transactions. Arthur looked at the document. The firm's name, Pierce and Harlan, Van Wert County. He looked at Evelyn's face. I saw that name in the second file, too, said Evelyn. And in the first one. She paused. The names are C, Pierce, and G. Harlan came up in the Irene Malloy file. Now, in the Frances Devereux case, it's the same firm. Different cases, different states, different families. But the same law firm. Arthur took the document. When did this firm close? I don't know, said Evelyn. I haven't looked into it yet. Arthur set the document down on the table. Keep looking, he said. Evelyn put the file in her drawer. But before closing it, she wrote the name Pearson Harlan in her notebook one more time. A new investigation was about to begin. If you enjoy seeing cases like this investigated and resolved, stay tuned.